This is a video introduction to PPAT Task 3. I will preface this video by saying I'm going to go through this task relatively quickly compared to the first two tasks because the format is so similar. In the video for Task 2, I had you frame the information that I presented around the idea of a pre-test and post-test. I'm going to do the same thing for Task 3. I want you to frame the information that I'm about to give you around the concept of lesson planning. Creating the lesson plan, determining your learning goals, implementing the lesson plan, and then assessing whether the lesson plan was successful or not. So in Task 3, you will demonstrate your ability to develop instruction, including the use of technology to facilitate student learning. And it specifically measures these in-task standards. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I will put a link to the PowerPoint below in the description box. So here is the content of Task 3. You are going to have to provide contextual information, and this is the same type of contextual information that you provided in Task 2. You will need to provide a written commentary, and this commentary will be a little bit longer than the previous two tasks. They were 7 pages typed. This will be 8 pages typed, or 25,500 characters. This commentary is going to be broken up into various text boxes in which you respond to activities and guided prompts. The activities that you're going to complete for this task are to plan for instruction, and as you do that, you are going to determine the standards and learning goals, the teaching strategies, the learning activities, and the resources that you are going to use. Then you're going to analyze the instruction, and you're going to analyze it for both the entire class and also for 2 focus students. And then you're going to reflect on your instruction, also differentiated between instruction for the whole class versus the 2 focus students. You are going to identify 2 focus students who reflect different learning needs. And then you will provide 6 artifacts, and I will return to the artifacts at the end of the video. So just as in Task 2, this is an unscored thing that you have to complete, but you have to complete it, and it is the contextual information. So remember, in Task 1 you created the contextual factors chart, and then in Task 2 you basically turned that chart into paragraph form, and you will just do the same thing here for Task 3. If you are teaching the same class or at the same teaching site, this may be exactly the same as what you submitted for Task 2. If you are teaching a different class or at a different teaching site, then you should fill out another contextual factors chart just to help you out with this process, and then you turn it into paragraph form and submit it. Okay, now you're going to plan for your instruction. And the first thing you're going to do is determine what standards and learning goals you're going to be teaching to. And your guiding prompts are: what learning theory or method will you use for your planning process? Provide a brief description of the theory and or method, and how will you make use of it? What learning goals and content standards, state and or national standards, did you identify for the lesson? How will they guide the planned learning activities? What is the content focus for the lesson? What related content that the students have previously encountered will support the learning in this lesson? What are some difficulties students might encounter with the content? How will you address the difficulties? And right now I'm going to give you hints for the future. So as you are planning and implementing all of these tasks, you want to make sure that you are using technology in your lesson. You need to determine a way to gather data about your students' learning or be able to measure their learning, because you need to reflect later on if they were able to learn the concept or not. And then you need to design your lesson so that you can collect student work, because you will need that as artifacts at the end. Then you will determine the types of instructional strategies you're going to use in your lesson. What different instructional strategies do you plan to use to engage students in the lesson and to enhance their learning? Provide a rationale for your choice of each strategy. How do the instructional strategies connect to the learning goals to facilitate student learning? What informed your decisions to use individual, small group, and/or whole group instruction to facilitate student learning? Then you're going to determine what the actual learning activity or activities are going to be during the lesson. What learning activities do you plan to implement in this lesson? Provide a rationale for your choices. How will these learning activities address students' strengths and needs? How did your class demographics inform the design of the learning activities you chose? And this final portion of the first part of the task is about determining what materials and resources are you going to use to support your instruction and student learning. Provide a rationale to support those choices. What types of technology do you plan to use in your instruction? How will your chosen technology enhance your instruction and student learning in the lesson? So this whole planning portion of the task, it's really about creating that lesson plan, but also making sure that you are matching the lesson plan to the standards, matching it to the students in your classroom. And in order to do that, you can look back at that contextual factors chart and at the contextual information that you provided at the beginning. This planning process makes you provide a rationale for every decision that you make. So in this way, you are not making any random decisions, and you are making sure that all decisions that you make in your teaching are based in pedagogy and in teaching strategies. Then you're going to choose your 2 focus students. So from the whole class, select 2 students who reflect different learning needs. Refer to them as Focus Student 1 and Focus Student 2. Then respond to the guiding prompts below. Now, these 3 guiding prompts you need to address for both students. So for both Focus Student 1 and Focus Student 2, determine the following. Identify both focus students' learning strengths and challenges related to the learning goals of the lesson. Describe how you will differentiate specific parts of your lesson plan to help each focus student meet the learning goals of the lesson. Provide a rationale. What evidence will you collect to show the progress that both focus students make toward the learning goals? So remember, in those hints for the future that I gave you a couple minutes ago, I said you need to make sure that you can actually explain and show that your students make progress towards the learning goal. You need to have data that you can show. So by identifying your 2 focus students, and also one of the previous guiding prompts was about determining problems that you anticipate the class might have with the learning goals. That all makes you think about what the anticipated challenges will be and how you can adapt to those challenges as you teach. Then you're going to analyze, and you're going to analyze for both the whole class and also for your 2 focus students. So this slide has to do with analyzing the instruction for the whole class. To what extent did the lesson, including instructional strategies, learning activities, materials, resources, and technology, help to facilitate student learning? How does the evidence you collected support this finding? How did the students use the content presented to demonstrate meaningful learning? Provide specific examples from the lesson and from the student work to support your analysis. While you were teaching, what adjustments to the lesson did you implement for the whole class to better support student engagement and learning? Provide examples to support your decision. This is particularly important in reflecting later on how well your instruction went. If you keep note of the adjustments that you have to make mid-lesson in order to perhaps clarify a topic or an instruction, then that's something that you need to reflect upon later and then update your teaching strategies to address. What steps did you take to foster teacher-to-student and student-to-student interactions? How did they impact student engagement and learning? This also will help you reflect later on your decision to use group instruction, whole class instruction, peer-to-peer instruction, co-teaching. What feedback did you provide during the lesson to facilitate student learning? What impact did the feedback have on student learning? Provide specific examples. Did you ask students to bring their work up to you once they reached a certain question or milestone for you to evaluate it? Did you have a series of question prompts that you asked along the way to see if students were understanding the material? Did you have maybe a series of short assignments that you collected along the way? Did you maybe walk around the classroom and specifically work with each group or student? Then you're going to analyze the differentiated instruction for each of the two focus students. To what extent did each of the two focus students achieve the learning goals of the lesson? Cite examples to support your analysis. This is where your assessment tool and collected data comes in handy. How did your differentiation of specific parts of the lesson help each of the two focus students meet their learning goals? Cite examples to support your analysis. And then finally, you're going to reflect, and you're going to reflect on how well the lesson went, both for the whole class and for the two focus students. So this slide is about the whole class. What specific instructional strategies, learning activities, materials, resources, and technology will you use to help students who did not achieve the learning goals? Describe how these lesson components will help the students achieve the learning goals. How will you use your analysis of the lesson and the evidence of student learning to guide your planning of future students for the whole class? Provide specific examples. So here it says you need evidence of student learning. So whatever assessment tool you used, how are you going to use that to, and the data that you collected from it, how are you going to use that to plan your future lessons? Then you'll reflect on how the instruction went for the two focus students. How will you use your analysis of the lesson and evidence of student learning to guide your planning for future lessons for each of the two focus students? Provide specific examples. That's all the components of task 3. So we're going to return to this slide that has all the components and the artifacts on it. So finally, let's go over these artifacts. You're going to need representative pages of a lesson plan for the whole class. That includes the use of technology. So remember, hints for the future, use technology. This has to be a maximum of 2 pages, and you can use their template from ETS, or you can use your own lesson plan template or design. Then you would need to submit a representative page of a differentiated lesson plan for each focus student, and those are a maximum of 1 page. Then you need to provide a work sample from any class member other than the 2 focus students, and that's a maximum of 1 page. So remember back from those hints for the future, I said you need to design your lesson plan so that you can collect student work, and this is why you need to submit it as an artifact. And then finally, you need a work sample from both Focus Student 1 and Focus Student 2, and those both need to be a maximum of 1 page. So I hope you are starting to realize that the content and really the format of tasks 1 through 3, it's all very similar, and each task is helping you design for a specific area of teaching within, pedagogy and within teaching philosophy, to prepare for it, to implement it, and then to reflect on it. And these are the things that any good teacher would be doing anyhow. So they're just making you actually write about it in a much more detailed manner. So that is the conclusion of the overview of the PPAT Task 3.